Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily, the community back and forth show where we discuss all the fun stuff that could be happening with the new expansion. To anyone new to the show, all you have to do is drop a message down in the comments below. I read them all, and if you've got an interesting point or question, you could appear in the next episode. Footage in the background, I haven't shot just yet. I'll try to do something interesting, guys. Not sure what just yet. The new PC is still at least a week away, and I'm expecting some kind of pre-order delay or something, who knows, so we'll have to find a way to make do. Comment number 1 is from Viator Eagle, who says, so, could the gods returning be worthy of a new Living World season, saga, or expansion pack? It does feel like we could see them come back after the dragon threat ends. So yeah, this is one of the big ticket ideas for where the story might go in a large, major way. I have to say though, I kind of feel bad that I'm even reading a message like this. To me, the gods coming back is not something I really want to see the story do too much. First of all, because I think that a lot of the deep lore and interesting stuff about the gods is kind of a dead end at the moment. I feel like their enigma and their disappearance is really the most compelling thing about them, and to just bring them back might not be so great. And also because I kind of feel like we did that already. You know, the Path of Fire story is the story of the gods coming back. I mean, obviously not the whole pantheon, but a god coming back, and I think that we're supposed to be satisfied with that. I remember Cossage in the Spud Discord showing me just a few days ago a dev quote where they basically said, look, Path of Fire was an idea of an expansion because we wanted to know what would happen with dragon versus god. That's what they wanted to do. And I don't know whether we'll go back there. The question is, what is the End of Dragons expansion about, obviously, as well. And my guess is it's dragon versus dragon this time. You know, the two dragons on the icon and all these ideas that we may not even dealt with some of the dragons by the end of the Icebrood Saga and so on. But back to this idea of the gods, the other big thing about this to me is we're in Guild Wars 2 at the moment. It's not Guild Wars 1 anymore, and it's not about the humans anymore. This is supposed to be like this multi-racial game experience where all of the races feel like they have risen to prominence in a big way, and I actually kind of consider it a failing of the sequel game that we in the community are still so interested in the purely human-centric stuff. We could finally be going to a cool era once Cantha's done with, where now we do start asking ourselves more about the Norn and the Char and the Asuran origins and all that. If you remember my Guild Wars Mysteries series, some of those early episodes I did were just on the origins of those races, because there are questions to answer, there are things that we should be able to dive into, and yet most of the time it's just human stuff. The one place where they kind of broke out of that, I think, was Sylvari. But then they played that hand really early with Heart of Thorns, and now we've kind of gone into this, I think, really dangerous place where it's mostly just Guild Wars 1 players that are being satisfied in a big way, and I want to see all of the races flourish. I really wanted to see the Norn step up in a fun and amazing way in the Icebrood Saga, but Icebrood Saga has ended up covering so much subject material, Primordus, and obviously the whole Char Civil War, that they feel like they get shunted out all the time, man. One of the reasons I love the idea that Mother, or this voice in the trailer, is a spirit of the wild, you know, spirit of dragon. If you remember those theories that we discussed, is because that would then kind of segue us. Like I mentioned, this character could be a bridge between the two big acts. This could segue us into something much more emotional and powerful for the Norn, and they're my front runners. Aaron quotes me yesterday on the whole legendary crafting economy comment, where I said they just need to make it harder to roll for pre's, and he says, I've played since release, thousands of hours, I've never seen a pre-drop. Yeah, look, let me be clear here. The drop rate for precursors, I think, is perfectly low enough, and they are very hard to come by. I've played for thousands and thousands of hours as well, and I'll tell you, I've only ever got 2. Both of them during periods of intense PvE farm activity, which is not something I usually relish in. So yeah, they don't really need to change that, but the idea of being able to acquire them from the Forge in the way that we do, yeah, I think that should be nerfed. I really do stand by that. And I think also you got to consider a lot of the people at this point who are still rolling in the Forge, they're not wide-eyed, new, enthusiastic players looking for a shortcut or a bit of a gamble on their first ever legendary. They're not those players. They're people who are using the Forge to try and flip for a bit more money, and it's damaging the economy, and it has been for a long time. So yeah, I think get rid of that stuff. Also, I think there's an interesting discussion to be had about the idea of a new idea of some kind of item in the economy that has a very low drop rate, like precursors, but something new, you know, because the precursors are pretty old, and again, their economy's been fairly damaged, so I wonder if ArenaNet could do something else with this next expansion. You did see with Path of Fire, they basically did that with stuff like the music boxes, some of those minis, but then they've been tweaked, and they didn't quite hit as well as Pre's did, or the Guild Wars 1 equivalent, I actually feel, is Black Dye, though obviously a precursor is a lot rarer than a Black Dye was in the first game, but the demand for Black Dyes was very high because it was character bound instead of account bound, and so on. Cholgon says, I really enjoy all these speculations about new features, mechanics, etc. But I'm slowly getting anxious about ArenaNet being ArenaNet and creating new features again while not iterating on old systems. The game is great right now, it just lacks content. The perfect add-on for me as a veteran would actually just be new maps, new elite specs, new raids, fractal strikes, new story missions, and new masteries. Of course, you need a few reworks for the early game, but Guild Wars 2 actually only lacks content. Also, you could very easily fix the hero point system for the End of Dragons elite specs by multiplying the costs and the hero point challenges rewards in Cantha by 10 in comparison to Path of Fire and Heart of Thorns elite specs. It forced the players to progress through Cantha to unlock them. It's actually what they did when Heart of Thorns released. Yeah, what you described there as a solution for the hero challenges is kind of like what other MMOs do as far as like their leveling and their carrots on the stick. It would work, I totally acknowledge that. Going to your other point, I don't know whether I can agree Guild Wars lacks content. I don't think I'll ever be able to agree that Guild Wars lacks content. I think that when we talk about content in MMOs, there are two things at play. There is content and your desire to play that content. And your desire to play that content is nearly always driven by overarching reward schemes. And in Guild Wars 2, and I'm not just talking about Guild Wars 2 of today, I'm talking about Guild Wars 2 of vanilla when everyone cried it had no end game and all that kind of stuff. It has always been a massive problem driving players to the epic amounts of content just because they don't have that leveling incentive, they don't have that gear grind incentive, and you know, whatever other systems they've added on top. Elite specializations are not a progression system. The mastery system in general is hardly a progression system as far as driving people to all the rich stuff that's out there and so on. One of the only times they ever got it really right was Heart of Thorns, I think, where you do experience a lot of that content. But it's not that Heart of Thorns actually has more content than POF, for example. POF is full of really rich and interesting things to do. You're just not driven to it. And so, you know, MMOs, you have to be really careful. There is this yin and this yang. Both have to be considered. And I would never say that Guild Wars has no content. I would say it has problems driving you around. And I'll go you another one. I think it's a little unfair. And I've been doing this a bit recently, but I'm reassessing my position. I think it's a little unfair to keep accusing ArenaNet of the whole reworking systems thing. Now, we all kind of fell back into this recently through the Icebrood saga, and I think that's for two big reasons. One, the Icebrood, well, three reasons really. The Icebrood saga overall, being called a saga rather than a season, kind of flared it up, and then it was a disappointment compared to what it was proposing to be, expansion-like and so on. Within the Icebrood saga, you saw the Strike Mission Initiative, which is kind of reworking the idea of raids. You know, one did supplant the other. We may still see raids return, but that definitely got people stirring. And then, of course, you had DRMs as well, and you had the sudden shift at the end of the saga, which really has flared it up and got me talking about it. But, you know, now that we know that DRMs and champions as a whole concept is really just there because they pushed everyone to do the expansion real quick, I kind of think, you know, they have just been iterating on systems. You know, this big broad stuff, they set it up in Heart of Thorns. POF didn't abandon masteries. It did a slightly different take on them. It iterated by, you know, making them all about the mounts. POF didn't abandon elite specializations. It followed the idea beat for beat. It didn't abandon guild halls. It added a new one. It didn't necessarily iterate here, but it did actually add that content. And then with the idea of meta events and so on, I would say Path of Fire simply iterated on what Heart of Thorns offered. Now, it iterated in all the ways that made it a poorer expansion long term for us playing those metas and experiencing them, but it was just an iteration. And so I think that End of Dragons will do the same. I don't think that they're going to go crazy here. And to your general spirit, your general message here saying, you know, you just want content, you actually just really want more stuff to play, I totally agree. I really do. And I actually think the outlook looks very good for End of Dragons. Anyone who's seriously enjoyed Elements of Heart of Thorns and elements of POF, I'm sure the End of Dragons is going to be good, because that's exactly what they'll give you. My kind of hope here is that it's a more Heart of Thorns leaning X-Pack, but with the content amount of POF. POF really had a lot more. It had a whole extra map, it had a weightier story with more detail in it, and it was fleshed out a little bit more. It had more variance in the kinds of dynamic events and what you did. Like Heart of Thorns, you're going to remember, didn't even have hearts, and I know people don't like hearts very much, but when we're talking about content that was implemented in an expansion, POF had them, and they were actually all really well detailed, really fun hearts that were better than any of the hearts that had come before, that being the core ones or the Season 3 ones. POF had a lot of content, and I think if End of Dragons does the same thing, it just decides to lean slightly more towards HOT this time with the way that the rewards and stuff are structured, we're in for a good time, aren't we? Am I wrong? Vion Nepew is asking something. Have we covered this? We must have covered this, surely. I mean, this is the kind of thing you would farm out in its own video and clickbait for views, right? But here we go. He says, when is your guess when the expansion will release? My guess is August the 25th or August the 28th, as it will be around the anniversary of Guild Wars 2's original release date. I can't imagine a content drought longer than May to August, assuming the last part of Champions lands in late April. Well, I think you've got a good guess. It's definitely going to be 2021. They've said that it's going to be 2021. The fact that they pushed the last episode of Champions closer, I think says an awful lot about how ready the expansion might be. But it could also be that they just have an idea for something in the gap between the end of Champions and the actual launch of the X-Pack. If they have some kind of concept for a new Visions of the Past release, for example, that's probably too much work. That's probably too high quality or whatever. But something, and perhaps it uses the scrying pool or not, to just tide us over through the May to August era, I would actually really like around a Halloween release date. I don't know whether they'll care that much about the anniversary of the game's release, by the way. Like when Heart of Thorns came out, we saw that they did it just kind of after. They even overlapped with an in-game festival, so I don't think that really matters. You know, they just dumped it in at the same time as Halloween. I think an autumn release date is going to allow them to get a really, really good X-Pack with ambitious concepts in it out to us and really rejuvenate the game and go for a lot of good stuff. But if they went that late, there is this question of what are they doing in the gap, because they have to do something in the gap. So I'm kind of two minds right now. I think either Halloween, or I think actually really soon. It could be a lot sooner than you expect. We might be looking at a late May, early June launch. And remember, we've only got March and April to get through before that's right on our doorstep. The time around, as we said before, the day of the Tengu, late April, whatever the news they give us there is really going to set the tone, I think. And there could be a chance we get a release date and it's not too far away, or there's a chance we'll get a release date and it's a bit off, but hey, we've got all this cool news from the studio coming out during the gap and some kind of initiative in game to play with. For what it's worth, I don't actually think the release date is as important right now as just getting news out. You know, people keep making these comparisons to Elder Scrolls and FF14 and how they've got lots of news going on. Maybe that's the only thing ArenaNet needs to do, and they can buy themselves a lot of time. But hey, what do I know? Garion Pridis says, hey WP, loving the series. I've been concerned for some time about the difference in build effectiveness between different builds. By my quick reasoning, which you could contest, a player with a full set of exotic or soldier's gear would do at least 50% and closer to 75% less damage than a player in full berserker's gear. This isn't accounting for sigils, runes, traits. You've spoken before about lazy, uninformed players in a mixture of greens and blues at level 80, and I agree that those players doing worse is normal and okay. However, isn't it crazy for a new level 80 player to decide that they want to be a tanky warrior, buy a full set of soldier's gear and be utterly useless in current content? Without DPS trackers or the advice of other players, this person might go on playing for years thinking that a 3k crit is a massive amount of damage. It might just be me, but I don't think a full set of exotic gear or of any kind should be useless, unless of course you picked a set antithetical to your build like healer's gear or condi gear on non-condi setup. Should DPS centric gear be brought down a bit, or soldier's gear and the like be buffed? I'd support a difference of 20 to 30% damage between builds rather than currently 50 to 80% damage difference. Alright, so I think you're actually confusing a couple of things. First of all, I don't think that just because you're in greens and blues and you've just hit 80 or whatever and you're in exotics that you're a lazy player. But I do think that, yeah, there is this thing where a lot of new players are pushed to soldiers especially. Soldiers is a core gear set It is very readily accessible. ArenaNet themselves kind of pushed it on players for a lot of time, and it's because it's supposed to be a mix of sustain, durability, as well as damage. And you know what I really need to do is actually play through some living world content, some open world content in pure soldiers on various classes to get a sense of whether the game is not calibrated around that anymore. But I always kind of got the sense that it was calibrated for that the devs were thinking about people with high latency, with low frame rates, who really were very new to MMOs in particular, who couldn't expect to be able to dodge everything, and they would need something with some built-in sustain to keep them going, all that vitality and toughness. And in all honesty, I like soldiers. I want to support soldiers. I think the idea that there is this whole gear set for that kind of content where you're out on your own and stuff is a good idea. And I wish, when I was doing my open world build series, it was soldiers that I was recommending, not berserkers or sinisters, or, Marauder kind of got a bit of a look in, but even then people are leery at it. I think really this conversation is a little bit confused here. This isn't about the difference between exotics and blues and greens, or exotics and ascendeds. This is the difference between item nomenclatures, the difference between soldiers and berserker. And well done, you've just stumbled your way into a classic debate. My answer to this has always been that power creep has undermined the necessity for soldiers. I haven't tested, as I admitted a second ago, but my gut feeling is that with all the power creep, you don't need soldiers anymore, because you can just pressure things away with those higher damage stat types using all the quality of life and incredible updates that have been stat crept into all the traits recently. Basically, the game is so easy, why would you ever play something more durable? There isn't really a concept of dying to random enemies, even out in Heart of Thorns at this point, with the power creep that's there. We actually did a bit of a moment on one of my streams recently where we went and checked out some previously dangerous Heart of Thorns stuff, and it's kind of all really easy to clear now. So now soldiers looks like an issue, but really I think it's just a question of the power creep. If I could legitimately and honestly sit here and say, hey, you're new to the game, start out in soldiers, because otherwise you're going to be getting killed constantly, I think that would be a good thing. But I can't recommend that. And for all these years, ArenaNet have been pretty much too scared, I think, to enact such a fundamental change of the difficulty in the game. Because what would happen, and I don't blame them for this, what would happen if they did push the game like this? You would have people clinging to their Berserker's gear. They'd have them looking at a WoodenPotatoes video where he's running around still in Berserker and slaughtering enemies because he's getting all these good dodges and stuff. And they'd say, oh, I can do that too. And they'd make themselves miserable because they have to be efficient and they have to be optimal. And they don't realize that the fun actually lies somewhere more moderate for the open world. And so the community would resist it. I think ArenaNet could never make a change like this. Soldiers now looks a bit weird. And maybe the real answer is, hey, they should just be putting people in Marauders, and soldiers should be a little bit less accessible, as well as all those other gear types as well. But I don't consider those so much of an issue because they're often sometimes, just associated with an expansion or a map in an expansion or a living world release, and so they're not so easy to stumble on. Aaron Edwards said, I still feel like they really dropped the ball regarding legendary weapons. The achievement collections were wonderful for a game all about fashion. That aspect has really slowed down. Well, I don't see what the achievement collections have anything to do with the fashion aspect. And I have to say, I agree that they've dropped the ball with legendary weapons. I wouldn't just say weapons, but I would say legendary items. I really stand by all those arguments I made about legendary mount system during the POF era. I think that they dropped the ball with the trinkets. I think they were kind of rushed out there, a bit ham-fisted, and I'm not excited about any. For a long time, I was very excited about what might they do with the next legendary trinket. Will End of Dragons have the legendary amulet? I wonder what it will do, and so on. And now just all of that's dead and buried and gone, and I look at these as signs that the devs just don't care that much about legendaries and some of these long-term systems anymore, which could be a sign to their ambitions about the whole franchise and so on. But I would say that I don't really think they've dropped the ball on fashion stuff. How has fashion slowed down? I think ever since, do you guys remember in season 4 when we had that patch with the Requiem and the Elegy armor, adding actual new armors to the game that you could get? It had nothing to do with the gem store, it was just gameplay to get stuff. Since that patch, there have been an unbelievable number of new full-on armor sets, weapon sets especially. The weapons they're going crazy with. But there's been a lot of armors available right through that whole season, all the way through all the Icebrood Saga stuff up till now. I don't think they've slowed down on fashion. And look, that's not to mention the gem store, which I know a lot of you guys is a line in the sand, even though it does just represent gold rewards if you want to spend gold on that stuff. I don't know, I think that things are still looking pretty bright. The only major system that's kind of lame now in terms of new excitements is dyes, right? Like, I mean, Jesus, who's actually excited about the exotic dyes that come in now? I'm honestly surprised that they're still finding new shades of red to sell to me. Does anyone out there actually have an idea for a dye at this point that doesn't already exist and you're desperate for it to be in the game? Well, that's going to be it for today, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Finally, I'm going to be recording 2 episodes in one day today, which means that at last Patreon is one day ahead again. For about a week here, they've actually not been, so you'll notice I haven't been talking about Patreon, but that's now reinstated. So if you are desperate to get to the very next episode right now, it's live already over on Patreon. It's just been the end of the month, so you know there's always a bit of a churn there. If anybody's interested in that whatsoever, please do consider it. It does fund my life, and I will see you and the production of future videos, and I'll see you for the next one very, very soon. I've got some cool ideas for extra videos as well. It's been too long since we did a mysteries and that strike mission video and all that good stuff. So I hope to see you guys there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.